My brother Douglas called me from Dubai International Airport. Gemma, I need to ask you something weird. Where's James right now? I glanced at my husband sitting across from me at our kitchen table, reading the morning news on his tablet. He's right here, I said, confused. We're having breakfast. There was a long pause, then Douglas's voice came back, shaky and uncertain. That's impossible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Because I'm looking at him right now in the first-class lounge. And Gemma, he's with another woman. I stared at James, my James, sitting 3 feet away from me in our Boston townhouse kitchen. He was wearing the gray cashmere sweater I'd given him for Christmas, his reading glasses perched on his nose, completely absorbed in whatever article he was reading. The morning sun hit his profile exactly the way it had for the past 9 years of our marriage. Douglas, that's not funny, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart had started beating faster. My brother wasn't the type to play pranks, especially not at 6 in the morning his time, which meant it was midnight in Dubai. I'm not joking, Gem. I'm dead serious. His voice had that edge it got when he was genuinely rattled. Douglas was a procurement officer for Weber Aviation, constantly traveling for work, and he'd seen enough of the world to not be easily shaken. I literally watched him walk past me 10 minutes ago. Same height, same walk, same everything. He's sitting in the Emirates first-class lounge right now with a blonde woman, maybe late 20s. They're drinking champagne and she's got her hand on his arm like they're together. James looked up from his tablet, noticing my expression. Everything okay? He asked, his British accent wrapping around the words with familiar warmth. You look pale. I held up one finger to him, just a minute, and turned away, walking toward our living room. My professional instincts were kicking in. I was a data security analyst for a major financial firm, trained to spot anomalies, identify breaches, and think systematically when things didn't add up. And this definitely didn't add up. Doug, you're absolutely sure it's him? I kept my voice low. Gemma, I've known James for 9 years. I was the best man at your wedding. I'm looking at him right now through the glass wall of the lounge. Blue suit, that expensive Tom Ford one you said he wore to client meetings, brown leather briefcase, even that watch you bought him for your anniversary. It's him. My mind raced through possibilities. Mistaken identity, but Douglas knew James too well. A twin James never mentioned, absurd, I'd met his entire family. Some kind of elaborate look-alike, but why? For what purpose? Can you take a picture? I asked. Without him seeing you. Already did. Sending it now. My phone buzzed. The photo loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, and when it finally appeared in full resolution, my stomach dropped. There he was. James Arthur, my husband, sitting in a luxury airport lounge 12 time zones away, leaning close to a beautiful blonde woman who was laughing at something he'd said. His body language was relaxed, intimate, familiar. The way his hand rested near hers on the armrest, the way he was smiling, that specific half-smile he gave when he was genuinely enjoying someone's company. I walked back into the kitchen in a daze. James was still there, still reading his tablet, still wearing that gray sweater. Still impossibly, undeniably present in our home. Who was that? He asked without looking up. Just Douglas. Calling from Dubai. I watched his face carefully for any reaction. How's the trip going? Still dealing with those supplier negotiations? His response was perfectly normal. Natural. Unrehearsed. There was no nervousness, no guilty flinch, no sign that the mention of Dubai meant anything to him at all. He said it's going well, I managed, sitting down across from him again. My coffee had gone cold. When's your first meeting today? 10 o'clock with the Henderson Group, then lunch with potential investors at noon. Should be home by 6. He finally looked up, studying me over his glasses. Are you sure you're all right? You really do look unwell. Just tired. Didn't sleep great. The lie came easily. 20 years of analyzing security breaches had taught me to compartmentalize, to maintain composure even when internal alarms were screaming. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Douglas. They just called his flight. Emirates EK 231 to Geneva. Boarding now. What the hell is going on, Gem? Geneva. James had never mentioned Geneva. Our shared calendar showed nothing about international travel. His passport was in our home safe. I'd seen it there last week when I retrieved some documents. Or was it? I watched the man across from me finish his coffee, watched him stand and stretch, watched him move through our kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Every gesture was right. Every detail was perfect. But my brother was watching the same man board a flight to Geneva with another woman. One of these realities was false. And I had no idea which one. James left for work at 8:30, kissing my forehead on his way out just like he always did. Love you, he said, grabbing his briefcase from the hall table. Don't work too hard today. Love you too, I replied automatically, the words feeling strange in my mouth. The moment the door clicked shut, I was moving. I went straight to our bedroom and pulled open the safe hidden behind a framed photo of us in Scotland. My hands were shaking as I entered the code, our wedding date, October 15, 2015. The heavy door swung open. James's passport sat right where it should be. British passport, navy blue cover, issued 3 years ago. I flipped it open. His photo stared back at me, serious and official. I checked the stamps. Nothing recent. The last international travel showed stamps from our trip to Portugal last summer. No Dubai. No Switzerland. No evidence of any travel in the past 6 months. But even as relief started to wash over me, my analyst brain kicked in with a darker thought. How hard would it be to have 2 passports? People did it all the time, dual citizenship, diplomatic credentials, or illegal forgeries. If someone was sophisticated enough to be in 2 places at once, they'd certainly be sophisticated enough to have backup documentation. My phone rang. Douglas again. His flight just took off, my brother said without preamble. Gemma, I followed them to the gate. I stayed back, but I watched them board together. The woman was wearing this huge diamond bracelet, and when they scanned his boarding pass, the gate agent called him Mr. Arthur. His name. Not some lookalike, not a coincidence. They addressed him by name. I sat down on our bed, still holding James's passport. Doug, I'm looking at his passport right now. It's here. In our safe. He couldn't have traveled internationally without it. The silence on the other end lasted too long. Unless he has another one, Douglas finally said, voicing exactly what I'd been thinking. Gem, I know how this sounds. I know it's insane. But I'm telling you what I saw with my own eyes. That was James. I'd bet my life on it. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, trying to think logically. I'd been married to James for 9 years, together for 10. We'd met at a charity gala in Boston. He was the charming British investment consultant who'd spilled wine on my dress and spent the entire evening apologizing and making me laugh. Our relationship had been a whirlwind romance that settled into comfortable partnership. We'd bought this townhouse together 5 years ago. We had shared bank accounts, shared friends, a shared life. But as I sat there in our bedroom, I started remembering small things that hadn't quite fit. Little inconsistencies I'd dismissed. 3 weeks ago, I'd come home early from work to find James just arriving too, claiming he'd been at a client meeting downtown. But when I'd hugged him, his coat had smelled like airport, that specific combination of jet fuel and recycled air conditioning that you can't mistake. I'd asked him about it, and he'd laughed, saying he'd been at a meeting near Logan Airport, so maybe that was why. 2 months ago, I'd borrowed his laptop when mine was updating, and I'd noticed an open tab for a hotel in Zurich. When I'd asked him about it, he'd said it was research for a client's investment portfolio. Perfectly reasonable explanation from an investment consultant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Last month, he'd gone to New York for 3 days for a conference. I'd offered to come with him, make it a romantic getaway, but he'd insisted it would be all boring seminars and networking events. When he'd come back, he'd seemed different somehow. More attentive. He'd brought me flowers, cooked my favorite dinner, been almost too perfect. I opened my laptop and pulled up our joint credit card statements. This was technically snooping, but at this point, I needed answers. My security clearance at work had taught me how to dig through data, how to spot patterns that others missed. There. A charge from last month at the Bauer Olac in Zurich. One of the most expensive hotels in Switzerland. The dates matched exactly when James had supposedly been at his conference in New York. My hand started shaking again as I scrolled further. A charge at Harrods in London, on a day when James was supposedly visiting his mother in Cambridge. A restaurant in Paris I'd never heard of, on our anniversary week, when he'd claimed to be working late every night on a major deal. The evidence was piling up, but it didn't make sense. How could my husband be living some secret life without me noticing? And more importantly, who was the man who'd kissed my forehead this morning and told me he loved me? I needed concrete proof. Financial records could be explained away, suspicious charges could have innocent reasons, but there was one thing that couldn't be faked, intimate knowledge that only the real James would have. When James came home that evening at 6:15, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. I'd spent the entire day planning this moment, running through scenarios in my head like debugging code, looking for the exploit that would crash his system. "Something smells incredible," he said, setting his briefcase down and loosening his tie. "Same routine as always." "What are we having?" "Thai curry," I said, stirring the pot. "Your favorite." He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and kissing my neck. The gesture was so familiar, so perfectly James, that for a moment I doubted everything. Maybe Douglas had been wrong. Maybe jet lag had made him see things that weren't there. Then I remembered the photo. The blonde woman. The champagne glasses. The flight to Geneva. "Actually," I said, turning to face him with a smile, "I used peanut oil this time. That new organic brand you've been wanting me to try." James looked at the pot, then back at me, his expression unchanged. "Perfect. I've heard great things about that brand." My heart sank even as my suspicions crystallized. The real James was severely allergic to peanuts. We'd spent our second date in an emergency room after he'd accidentally eaten a spring roll that had been cooked in peanut oil. We kept 2 EpiPens in the house, one in the kitchen, one in our bedroom. He wore a medical alert bracelet every single day. The man standing in front of me wasn't wearing that bracelet. "Where's your bracelet?" I asked, keeping my tone casual and curious rather than accusatory. He glanced at his wrist, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Panic? Calculation? Then it was gone, replaced by an easy smile. "Must have left it on the bathroom counter this morning," he said. "I took it off to shower and forgot to put it back on. I'll grab it after dinner." "No rush," I said, turning back to the stove. "Dinner's almost ready anyway." We sat down to eat, and I watched him take his first bite of the curry I deliberately prepared with peanut oil. He chewed, swallowed, complimented the flavor. No reaction. No swelling. No reaching for an EpiPen. No concern whatsoever. The real James would have smelled the peanut oil the moment he walked into the kitchen. His allergy was that severe. "So," I said, taking a sip of wine, "I was thinking we should visit your mother this weekend. It's been too long since we've been to Cambridge." James nodded enthusiastically. "That's a wonderful idea. She'd love to see us. We could make a whole weekend of it, drive up Saturday morning, stay through Sunday." I felt cold despite the warm food in front of me. James's mother had died 2 years ago. Breast cancer. I'd held his hand at her funeral. We'd spent weeks sorting through her belongings in that Cambridge cottage. The real James would never, ever forget that his mother was dead. Maybe we could take her to that restaurant she loves, I continued, pushing harder. The one near the river where we had lunch after our wedding. Perfect, he said, taking another bite. She always loved that place. I excused myself to the bathroom, locking the door and bracing my hands against the sink. My reflection looked pale, frightened. This man in my kitchen, eating dinner at my table, sleeping in my bed, he wasn't James. He looked like James, moved like James, even had James's mannerisms and accent. But he wasn't my husband. I pulled out my phone and texted Douglas, "You were right. It's not him. I just tested him. He failed every test." The response came immediately, "What do we do?" Good question. I couldn't call the police and say, "My husband is an imposter," without sounding insane. I had no proof beyond failed allergy tests and forgotten deaths, nothing that would stand up to scrutiny. Whoever had orchestrated this had been thorough, detailed, prepared. I opened my phone's voice recorder app and hit record, tucking the phone into my cardigan pocket. From now on, I was documenting everything. When I returned to the kitchen, the man who looked like James was loading the dishwasher, humming something tunelessly. So domestic. So normal. So completely wrong. "I love you," he said when he saw me, just like he had that morning. "I love you too," I replied, and started planning how to catch whoever was behind this elaborate deception. The next morning, I told the imposter I had an early meeting and left the house at 6:30. Instead of going to my office at the financial firm, I drove across town to a small cafe in Cambridge where I'd arranged to meet Abigail Chin, my former roommate from MIT and the only person I trusted with something this insane. Abigail had graduated top of our class in computer science before pivoting into what she vaguely called private digital security. Her divorce 3 years ago from a hedge fund manager who'd been embezzling from his own clients had transformed her from corporate IT specialist into someone who specialized in uncovering digital deception. If anyone could help me understand how sophisticated this operation was, it was her. She was already waiting when I arrived, laptop open, her expression serious. I'd given her only the basics over an encrypted message last night. Husband might be imposter. Need help. Urgent. Show me everything, she said without preamble. I slid into the booth and pulled out my phone, showing her the photos Douglas had taken, the credit card statements I'd compiled, the video I'd secretly recorded during last night's dinner where the imposter ate peanuts without dying and agreed to visit James's dead mother. Abigail watched the video twice, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "Gemma, this is professional-level identity theft. We're not talking about some amateur con artist. Whoever set this up had resources, time, and detailed information about your life. Can you find out who he really is?" I asked, keeping my voice low even though the cafe was nearly empty. "Already working on it." She pulled up facial recognition software I'd never seen before, definitely not anything commercially available. "I'm running his face through some databases. This might take a few minutes." While we waited, she started pulling up other information. "Your home security system, do you have cameras?" "Just a Ring doorbell." "Give me access to the account." I logged her in and watched as she pulled up weeks of footage, fast-forwarding through clips of James, or whoever this was, coming and going from our townhouse. She zoomed in on specific frames, enhancing the images. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. "See how the shadow falls here? It's wrong. The angle doesn't match the light source. And here," she pulled up another frame, "there's a slight flicker when he passes under your porch light. These are signs of sophisticated video manipulation. Someone's been editing our security footage. Not just editing. Replacing. They're inserting fabricated videos into your system. This is deepfake technology combined with real-time video manipulation. This kind of software costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and requires serious technical expertise." My head was spinning. But why? Why go to all this trouble? Abigail's facial recognition software beeped. "Got him. His name is Mario Hemmings, age 34, professional actor from London. Small theater productions, some commercial work, nothing major. But here's what's interesting. She pulled up his bank records, and I didn't ask how she'd accessed them. 3 months ago, he received a cash deposit of £50,000. Then monthly payments of £10,000 since then. Someone paid him to pretend to be my husband, I said, the words sounding surreal even as I spoke them. Not just pretend. They paid him to study your husband. Look at this. She opened a cloud storage account that apparently belonged to Mario. Inside were hundreds of files, videos of James from various angles, audio recordings of his voice, documents detailing his mannerisms, preferences, daily routines. This is like a dossier for an acting role, except the role is living your life. My phone buzzed. A text from Douglas, just landed in Boston. Where are you? I'd asked him to cut his Dubai trip short and come home. Whatever was happening, I needed all the allies I could get. There's more, Abigail said, her face grim. I accessed your husband's work computer remotely, don't ask how. Someone's been downloading confidential client files from his investment firm. Proprietary information about major deals, merger plans, insider information that would be worth millions to the right buyers. Corporate espionage, I said, my security analyst brain finally catching up. This isn't just about replacing James. They're using his access to steal information. And guess who's going to be blamed when it's discovered? Abigail closed her laptop. Gemma, we're not just dealing with marital fraud. We're looking at federal crimes. If this comes out the wrong way, you could lose everything, your career, your reputation, possibly your freedom. Douglas texted again, at the cafe. Coming in. I watched my brother walk through the door, exhausted from his overnight flight but determined. He slid into the booth next to Abigail. Okay, he said. Tell me what we're dealing with and how we're going to fix it. We moved our operation to Abigail's apartment in Somerville, a converted loft that looked more like a high-tech command center than a place anyone actually lived. 3 monitors lined one wall, and the amount of computer equipment scattered around would make most IT departments jealous. Coffee, she offered, already booting up her systems. Douglas and I both nodded, and she disappeared into the kitchen while I sat down at her main workstation. My hands were steadier now that I had a team, now that I wasn't alone in this nightmare. Let's start with the money, I said, pulling up our joint bank accounts on one of the monitors. This was my domain, financial analysis, pattern recognition, finding the anomalies hidden in rows of data. If someone's running an operation this sophisticated, they need funding. And if James is involved, he's moving money somewhere. What I found over the next 2 hours made me physically ill. Our joint savings account, the one we'd been building for years to eventually buy a vacation home, had been systematically drained. Not in obvious large chunks that would trigger alerts, but in carefully calculated withdrawals just under $10,000, the federal reporting threshold. $9,000 here, $8,500 there, always irregular enough to look like legitimate expenses. Look at the dates, Douglas said, leaning over my shoulder. They line up with those credit card charges you found. Zurich, London, Paris. He was withdrawing cash before each trip. But that was just the beginning. When I dug deeper into James's business accounts, using passwords I technically shouldn't have but legally could access as his spouse, I found something far worse. Oh my God, I whispered, staring at the screen. James had taken out a home equity line of credit against our townhouse 6 months ago. $450,000, borrowed against property I thought was nearly paid off. The money had been transferred through a series of shell companies, each registered in a different country, a holding company in the Cayman Islands, an investment firm in Panama, a consulting group in Cyprus. Abigail came back with coffee and immediately started tracing the trail. These are classic money laundering structures, she said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Let me see if I can track where it ultimately ended up. While she worked, I opened James's work email, another legally gray area, but I was past caring about propriety. What I found there made my blood run cold. Emails to people I'd never heard of, discussing confidential client deals. Attachments containing proprietary financial models from the investment firm where James worked. Messages about packages and deliveries that clearly weren't about actual physical goods. He's been selling insider information, I said, my voice hollow. Corporate espionage, just like you said. He's been using his position to steal confidential data and sell it to competitors. Douglas grabbed my shoulder, steadying me. How long has this been going on? I scrolled back through the emails, my stomach churning. At least 8 months. Maybe longer if he was using other accounts. Got something, Abigail announced. The money trail leads to a Swiss bank account registered to a company called Meridian Consulting Group. But here's what's interesting, there's a second name on the account. She pulled up the registration documents she'd somehow managed to access. There, next to James Arthur's name, was another, Crystal Weber. Who's Crystal Weber? Douglas asked. Let me find out. Abigail ran the name through her databases. Within minutes, she had a profile. Crystal Weber, 27 years old, originally from Manchester. Works as a luxury lifestyle consultant according to her LinkedIn, but that seems to be a cover. Her travel records show she's been to Dubai 4 times in the past 6 months, Switzerland twice, and she's made regular trips to London. She pulled up a photo, and my heart stopped. It was the blonde woman from Douglas's photos at the Dubai airport. The same woman who'd been drinking champagne with James in the first-class lounge. That's her, Douglas confirmed. That's who he was with. I stared at the woman's face on the screen. She was beautiful in that polished, expensive way, perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect everything. And she was clearly deeply involved in whatever James was doing. There's more, Abigail said quietly. I found text messages between James's phone and hers. Gemma, I'm sorry, but you need to see these. She pulled up the messages, and I read them with growing horror. They went back over a year. Plans for meetings, coded discussions about transfers and clients, and interspersed throughout, personal messages that made it clear this wasn't just a business relationship. Miss you. Can't wait for Zurich next month. James. Counting the days. The wife still suspects nothing? Crystal. She's completely oblivious. Too focused on her own work to notice mine. James. I stood up abruptly, my chair rolling backward. I need air. I stood on Abigail's balcony, the cold November air biting at my face, trying to process the scope of James's betrayal. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't even just financial fraud. This was a coordinated, long-term operation to steal from me, from his clients, from everyone who'd trusted him. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me hit accept. Mrs. Arthur? A woman's voice, hesitant, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Yes? You don't know me, but I know what's happening to you. Check your husband's storage unit. The one in Quincy he thinks you don't know about. Unit 237. The code is 8-4-7-2. Who is this? How do you? The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone. Douglas appeared in the doorway behind me. Who was that? I have no idea. But they just gave me an address. I turned to face him. James has a storage unit in Quincy. They gave me the unit number and access code. That could be a trap, Douglas said carefully. Or it could be evidence. I pushed past him back into the apartment. Abigail, can you find out who owns a storage unit at? I checked my recent calls for the number I'd written down, Secure Space Storage in Quincy. Unit 237, registered to James Arthur. She was already typing. Give me a second. Got it. Rented 6 months ago, paid in cash for a full year in advance. No digital trail, no credit card, just cash deposits. 6 months. That lined up with when the home equity loan had been taken out, when the systematic planning had begun. James had hired Mario only 3 months ago for the final phase, but the groundwork had been laid much earlier. "We need to go there," I said. "Now." 40 minutes later, we pulled up to a sprawling complex of orange storage units south of the city. The place was mostly deserted on a Wednesday afternoon, just a few people loading boxes into trucks. We found Unit 237 in the back corner, away from security cameras. My hands shook as I entered the code, 8-4-7-2. The lock clicked open. Inside, the unit was small but packed with filing boxes, all neatly labeled and organized. This wasn't a hastily hidden stash, this was an archive. Someone had carefully documented everything. Douglas pulled out the first box. Financial records. These go back 2 years. I opened another. Inside were printed emails, highlighted and annotated, showing conversations between James and various corporate contacts. Discussions of upcoming mergers, confidential valuation reports, insider information that would be worth millions to anyone willing to trade on it. "He's been planning this for years," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Abigail was recording everything with her phone, photographing each document. "These aren't just records of crimes. These are insurance." Someone was keeping evidence against James. The next box made everything click into place. Inside were contracts, signed and notarized. Payment agreements between James Arthur and Mario Hemmings. Detailed instructions on how to impersonate James, down to voice coaching schedules and accent training sessions. There were photos of James from every angle, voice recordings, even medical records, everything someone would need to become him. But it was the handwritten notes at the bottom of the box that changed everything. Subject is becoming suspicious. Recommend accelerating timeline. Wife is data security analyst, higher risk than anticipated. Phase 3, complete asset transfer by December 15th, exit strategy ready. December 15th. That was 3 weeks away. "They have an endgame," I said, showing the notes to Douglas and Abigail. "Whatever they're planning, it's happening in 3 weeks." Douglas pulled out another folder. "Look at this. Travel itineraries." He spread out printed airline confirmations. James and Crystal Weber have tickets to Buenos Aires on December 16th. One-way tickets. "And there's a property deed here. They bought a villa in Argentina 6 months ago." "Non-extradition country," Abigail said grimly. "Once they're there with the money, getting them back will be nearly impossible." I sat down on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by evidence of my husband's systematic destruction of our life. But something still didn't make sense. Why would someone document all of this? I asked. Why would anyone working with James keep such detailed records? This is enough evidence to put him, and them, in prison for decades. Abigail was thinking the same thing. Unless whoever kept these records isn't working with James anymore. Or never was fully on his side. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "The woman isn't who you think she is. Look at Crystal Weber's real background. Start with Manchester Police Department, 2019. I showed the message to Abigail. She immediately started searching, her expression growing more confused. "That's impossible," she muttered, staring at her screen. "What?" She turned the laptop to face me. "Crystal Weber doesn't exist. The person using that name is actually Harriet Nicholas, former fraud investigator with Manchester Police. She left the force 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances." She pulled up a photo from a police department database. It was definitely the same woman. "An ex-cop," Douglas said slowly. "Who's been pretending to be James's accomplice?" "Or," I said, the pieces finally falling into place, "who's been investigating him all along?" We needed legal help, and we needed it fast. I called Gracie Morrison, a former federal prosecutor who'd left the DA's office 3 years ago to start her own practice. We'd met when I'd testified as an expert witness in a financial fraud case, and she'd earned my respect by being ruthlessly thorough and unshakable under pressure. She answered on the second ring. "Gemma? It's been a while. Gracie, I need your help." Can you meet me? It's urgent and it's complicated. How complicated? My husband has been replaced by an imposter while the real one is committing international financial fraud with a woman who might be an undercover investigator. Complicated. There was a pause. I'll be at my office in 20 minutes. Come alone, attorney-client privilege only extends to you, not your entourage. I left Douglas and Abigail at the storage unit to photograph everything and met Gracie at her office in the financial district. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the entire situation, showing her the evidence we'd compiled, the photos, the financial records, the storage unit contents. When I finished, she sat back in her leather chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. This is extraordinary. But here's your problem: everything you found could be explained away by a good defense attorney. The imposter could claim he was hired for legitimate reasons, research for a role, a surprise you were planning, anything. The financial transfers were made with valid credentials and authorization. Without the real James here to contradict the story, it's all circumstantial. So what do? We set a trap. And we make sure that when it springs, we have federal authorities there to witness it. She pulled out a legal pad and started sketching out a strategy. You said the end game is December 15th. That gives us 3 weeks to build an airtight case. We need to catch them in the act of the final transfer, with witnesses, with documentation, with everything so clean that no lawyer in the world can spin it. How? She smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the smile of a prosecutor who'd just seen a path to conviction. We use their own plan against them. First, we need to contact Harriet Nicholas, or Crystal Weber, whatever she's calling herself. If she's really an investigator, she's building her own case. We need to coordinate, not compete. And if she's actually working with James? Then we've given away nothing they don't already know. But I don't think she is. Former cops don't usually turn to international fraud. They turn to catching the people who do. She pulled out her phone. I have contacts at Interpol and the FBI. Let me make some calls. While Gracie worked her connections, I focused on what I did best, following the money. Back at Abigail's apartment, I created a financial virus, a piece of code disguised as a routine investment document that would activate the moment anyone accessed our joint accounts from outside the United States. When triggered, it would freeze all associated accounts, lock down transactions, and automatically alert federal banking authorities to suspicious activity. That's brilliant, Abigail said, watching me work. But how do you get James to trigger it? He's going to check our investments before making his final move. It's habit, he always reviews our portfolio before major decisions. I'll upload it to our shared cloud storage labeled as Q4 Investment Review 2024. He won't be able to resist looking. Douglas paced the apartment, his procurement officer mind working through logistics. What about Mario? The imposter. He's the weak link. If we can get him to cooperate, he becomes our strongest witness. Already thought of that, I said. Tonight, I'm going to confront him. Give him a choice: cooperate and face minimal charges as a witness, or stay quiet and go down as a co-conspirator in international fraud. That's dangerous, Douglas protested. What if he runs? What if he warns James? He won't. He's an actor who thought he was getting a big break, not a career criminal. When he realizes the scope of what he's involved in, he'll cooperate. I hoped I sounded more confident than I felt. My phone buzzed. A text from Gracie: call me. Now. I dialed immediately. What did you find? Harriet Nicholas is definitely investigating James, but not for any law enforcement agency. She's working independently. Gracie's voice was tight with concern. Gemma, James Arthur isn't his real name. The man you married is actually James Holt, wanted in the UK for fraud dating back 15 years. He's been using false identities to run investment schemes across Europe. Your marriage, your entire life together, it's part of his cover. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of Abigail's desk. Harriet has been tracking him for 2 years, Gracie continued. She's building a case, but she's been working outside official channels because she thinks there's corruption in the Manchester department. She needs our evidence, and we need her testimony. I'm arranging a meeting. When? Tomorrow morning. Neutral location. She wants to talk. And Gemma? Gracie paused. That anonymous call about the storage unit? That was her. She needed you to find the evidence without compromising her cover. She'll explain everything tomorrow. That night, I cooked dinner like I had every other night that week. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad. Mario, because I couldn't think of him as James anymore, came home at his usual time, kissed my forehead with practiced affection, and asked about my day. Pretty standard, I lied, setting the table. Lots of security audits. You know how it is this time of year. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. He complimented the food. Asked if I wanted to watch a movie after dinner. Every gesture was perfect, every word calibrated to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But I could see it now, the slight hesitation before he used pet names, the way his eyes would flicker when I mentioned specific memories, the careful performance of a man playing a role. I've been thinking, I said, refilling his wine glass. Our anniversary is coming up next month. 9 years married, 10 years since we met at that charity gala. Can you believe it's been that long? He smiled, taking a sip. Time really does fly when you're happy. I want to do something special. A party, here at the house. Invite all your colleagues from the investment firm, your biggest clients. Show off the home we've built together. I kept my voice light, enthusiastic. Maybe Tuesday morning before the markets open? Something unexpected. Make it memorable. I saw the confusion flicker across his face. Tuesday morning was an unusual time for a party, and he knew it. But refusing would break character, would admit that something was wrong. That's different, he said carefully. But if that's what you want, I'm happy to do it. Perfect. You handle the invitations tonight, make it sound exclusive, important. Tell them it's urgent they attend. I'll take care of everything else. He nodded slowly, pulling out his phone. I watched him compose the message, saw his fingers hesitate over the keyboard. He knew something was off, but he couldn't figure out what. His script hadn't prepared him for this. Within an hour, responses started coming in. Confusion, curiosity, but ultimately acceptance. When James Arthur, or James Holt, or whoever he really was, requested your presence, people showed up. After dinner, while Mario loaded the dishwasher, I excused myself to the bathroom. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and texted the group chat with Douglas, Abigail, and Gracie. Trap is set. Tuesday morning. He took the bait. Gracie responded immediately, FBI will be ready. Meeting with Harriet tomorrow at 10 a.m. Coffee shop on Newbury Street. Come alone. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, pale, exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination. 10 days ago, I'd thought I had a stable marriage, a comfortable life, a future I could predict. Now I was coordinating with federal agents to catch the man I'd thought was my husband. When I came back out, Mario was sitting on the couch, his phone in his hands, staring at the screen with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Everything okay? I asked, sitting down beside him. He looked up, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. I saw genuine panic in his eyes before he managed to pull the character back together. Just work stress. Nothing to worry about. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I said, making my voice soft and concerned. This was it, the moment to give him a way out. If something's wrong, if you're in trouble, I want to help. He studied my face, and I could see him trying to figure out if I knew, if this was a test, if the performance was finally over. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. Gemma, he said finally, and his accent had shifted. Not quite British anymore, but not quite anything else either. The voice of a man too exhausted to maintain the facade. How long have you known? Since Dubai. When my brother saw James on that flight. He closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. When he opened them again, the character of James Arthur was completely gone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was getting into. Tell me everything, I said quietly. And maybe I can help you. He looked at me for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Then he started talking, and what he told me was even worse than I'd imagined. My real name is Mario Hemmings. I'm an actor from London. 3 months ago, a man approached me after a show. Said his name was James Arthur, that he needed someone to house sit and maintain appearances while he worked on a sensitive business deal. Offered me £50,000 up front, plus $10,000 a month. I thought it was eccentric, maybe weird, but legal. When did you realize it wasn't? His voice dropped to almost a whisper. 2 weeks ago. I found documents he'd left behind. I realized what he was really doing. By then, I was in too deep. The coffee shop on Newbury Street was crowded with the morning rush, students with laptops, business people grabbing espresso before meetings, tourists studying maps. I spotted Harriet Nicholas immediately. She sat in the back corner, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a leather jacket instead of the designer clothes she'd worn in Douglas's airport photos. She looked up as I approached, her expression guarded but not hostile. Mrs. Arthur. Or should I say Mrs. Holt? Gemma is fine. I sat down across from her. You've been investigating my husband for 2 years. Your husband has been reinventing himself for 15 years, moving from identity to identity, country to country, always one step ahead of the law. She slid a folder across the table. James Holt, originally from Leeds. Started with small-time investment scams in Manchester, graduated to identity theft and corporate espionage. He's stolen approximately £12 million over the past decade, ruined at least 30 families, and disappeared before anyone could build a case. I opened the folder. Inside were photos of James, my James, with different women in different cities, always playing the same role. Devoted husband, trustworthy investment consultant, charming British gentleman. Each relationship had lasted between 3 and 5 years before he vanished with the money. I was number 4, I said, my voice hollow. You were supposed to be. But you're different from the others. Harriet pulled out her own phone, showing me surveillance photos. The previous wives were wealthy but passive. You're a data security analyst with forensic training. You were always going to figure it out eventually. That's why he accelerated his timeline and hired Mario 3 months ago for the final phase. The planning started 6 months earlier, the storage unit, the shell companies, the systematic asset transfers. The storage unit. You kept those records. That anonymous call, that was you. She nodded. I needed you to find the evidence without compromising my cover. If James suspected I wasn't really his partner, he'd disappear again and I'd lose 2 years of work. Why not just go to the FBI yourself? Her expression darkened. Because James has connections. Someone in law enforcement has been feeding him information, that's how he stayed ahead for so long. My own captain in Manchester was one of his informants. I tried to report it, but no one believed me. So I left the force and went rogue, burned my career to chase him independently. I needed to build an airtight case before involving authorities he hasn't corrupted. Gracie Morrison says we can coordinate. Set a trap for Tuesday. He thinks he's coming to an anniversary party, but the FBI will be there. Good. But we need James too, the real one. Mario will testify, but without James, a good lawyer could still create reasonable doubt. She pulled up a text message on her phone. He's in Geneva right now meeting with Swiss banking contacts to finalize the account transfers. He's scheduled to return to Boston on Monday. He needs to be here to collect the final payments from his insider trading contacts and execute the last transfers before fleeing to Argentina. How do you know his schedule? A small smile. I've had access to his real phone for 6 months. He thinks I'm his partner, remember? He tells me everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Abigail, financial virus is live. Uploaded to cloud storage. The moment he accesses it from outside the US, everything freezes and FBI gets automatic notification. I showed the message to Harriet. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. You built a trap for the money. I built a trap for the man. Combined, he has no escape route. We spent the next hour coordinating details. Harriet would continue playing her role, staying close to James, reporting his movements. I would maintain the illusion at home with Mario, who'd agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for immunity. Gracie would coordinate with FBI agents she trusted, specifically Agent Sarah Brennan, who specialized in international financial crimes and had no connections to the Boston field office where James's informant likely worked. As we left the coffee shop, Harriet touched my arm. Gemma, I know you saw me with him, in Dubai, at restaurants, on that flight to Geneva, playing the devoted girlfriend. I saw your brother watching us at the airport. I knew he'd tell you, and I couldn't warn you without blowing my cover. That was the hardest part, knowing you were suffering while I pretended to be complicit, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm, acting like I was in love with him. But I needed him to trust me completely to get the evidence that would finally put him away. You're stopping it now. That's what matters. He lands Monday at 3. Everything's proceeding as planned. Monday morning arrived with unusual warmth for late November. Mario was visibly nervous, drinking coffee with shaking hands, checking his phone constantly. He lands at 3, he said. What if he knows? What if he figured it out? Then we adapt, I said, projecting confidence I didn't entirely feel. At 3:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Harriet, he's here. Logan Airport. Picked him up in the arrivals area. Acting completely normal. No suspicion. Tomorrow morning, this ends. Tuesday morning arrived cold and clear. I'd barely slept, running through every possible scenario in my head. By 7 a.m., our townhouse was transformed, coffee brewing, pastries arranged on the dining table, everything looking festive and celebratory. Mario moved through the space like a ghost, his nervousness palpable. They'll be here soon, I said, checking my phone. Gracie had confirmed that FBI agents were already positioned in unmarked vehicles outside. Agent Sarah Brennan and her team would wait until all the witnesses had arrived before making their move. The first guest arrived at 7:30. Robert Chen from Harrington Financial, James's biggest client, looking confused but intrigued. Then Jennifer Watts from the investment firm's Boston office. David Martinez, a senior partner. One by one, they filed in, colleagues, clients, people whose portfolios represented billions in managed assets. This is quite unusual, Robert said, accepting a coffee. An anniversary party on a Tuesday morning? James insisted on doing something memorable, I replied, the lie smooth on my tongue. Something none of you would forget. By 7:55, 15 people crowded into our living room, making awkward small talk and checking their watches. Mario stood by the window, his face pale, pretending to text on his phone. At 7:58, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. The doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Agent Sarah Brennan, her credentials already out, flanked by 5 other agents in FBI windbreakers. Federal Bureau of Investigation, she announced, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent apartment. We have a warrant for the arrest of James Arthur, also known as James Holt. The living room erupted in confused murmurs. Robert Chen nearly dropped his coffee cup. Jennifer Watts pulled out her phone, probably already calling the firm's legal department. That would be me, Mario said, stepping forward with his hands raised. His British accent was completely gone now, replaced by his natural London working-class voice. Except my name is Mario Hemmings, and I'm ready to cooperate. I was hired to impersonate James Arthur. I have evidence, recordings, contracts, everything. Agent Brennan nodded to one of her team members, who stepped forward with handcuffs. Mr. Hemmings, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. I waive my rights, Mario interrupted. I want to cooperate immediately. I have a storage unit in Quincy with everything documented. And the Real James Arthur is already in custody, Agent Brennan said, speaking into her radio. Team 2, confirm status. The radio crackled. Agent Brennan, primary subject and female accomplice apprehended at Logan Airport Hotel at 0600 hours. Both in custody, no incidents. A wave of relief and something else, something that felt like grief, washed over me. They'd arrested him early this morning, before he could suspect anything was wrong. Before he could run. Wait, I said, my voice shaking slightly. You arrested Harriet too? For appearance only, Brennan said calmly, lowering her voice so only I could hear. If Holt has an informant in law enforcement watching this operation, we can't risk them warning his other associates or helping him build a defense. As far as anyone monitoring knows, we caught them both, and his entire network is exposed. She'll be released within the hour with full commendation for her undercover work. I watched the assembled guests trying to process what was happening. David Martinez had gone pale. Robert Chen was already on his phone, likely realizing his company's confidential information had been compromised. My laptop, positioned on the dining table, suddenly chimed with an alert. I'd been monitoring our joint accounts, waiting for this moment. Agent Brennan, I called out, turning the screen so she could see. The financial virus just activated. Someone accessed our accounts from a Swiss IP address 20 minutes ago, probably James trying to check balances before his planned meeting this morning. All associated accounts are now frozen across 4 countries. You should have automatic notifications about suspicious international transfers. She checked her phone, then nodded grimly. Confirmed. $7.4 million locked across multiple jurisdictions. Transaction records forwarded to federal prosecutors, IRS, SEC, and Interpol. Nobody's accessing those funds now. She turned to address the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. The man some of you have been meeting with for the past 3 months was an imposter hired by the Real James Arthur, whose legal name is James Holt. Mr. Holt has been using his position to steal confidential corporate information and facilitate insider trading for the past 8 months. We have reason to believe some of your company's proprietary data was compromised. FBI financial crime specialists will be contacting each of you today to assess the damage and coordinate recovery efforts. The room erupted in overlapping voices, questions, accusations, panic. I stood there numbly as agents photographed everything, collected evidence, and treated our home as the crime scene it had become. Gracie appeared at my elbow, having slipped in behind the FBI team. You did it, she said quietly. Clean arrest, multiple witnesses, incontrovertible evidence. No lawyer is getting him out of this. Through the window, I could see news vans pulling up outside. Someone had tipped off the media, probably Jennifer, who'd been live streaming on her phone since the FBI arrived. My phone buzzed. A text from Douglas, watching the news. It's everywhere. You're on CNN. Are you okay? I typed back, it's over. Finally over. But even as I sent it, I knew the hard part was just beginning. The next 72 hours were a blur of interrogation rooms, legal consultations, and media circuses. Federal prosecutors moved with impressive speed once they saw the mountain of evidence we'd compiled. Mario's cooperation, combined with Harriet's 2 years of documentation and my financial forensics, created a case so airtight that James's attorney, an expensive shark from New York, took one look at the evidence and advised his client to negotiate a plea. I sat in Gracie's office on Friday afternoon, exhausted but somehow still functioning on adrenaline and bitter coffee. Agent Brennan had just left after walking us through the final damage assessment. $7.4 million across your accounts, his insider trading profits, and client funds, Gracie summarized, reviewing her notes. All of it frozen and in the process of being recovered. The Swiss banks are cooperating, apparently, they don't like being used for international fraud schemes that make headlines either. What about the companies? I asked. How bad is the corporate espionage damage? Bad, but not catastrophic. The data he stole was valuable, but he hadn't sold most of it yet. We recovered his client list. He had buyers lined up in Hong Kong and Singapore, but the FBI caught him before the final transactions. Harrington Financial is facing some insider trading investigations, but they're cooperating fully. They've already fired 3 executives who were working with him. My phone rang. Douglas's name appeared on the screen. Turn on the news, he said without preamble. Channel 7. I pulled up the live stream on Gracie's computer. There on the screen was James, the real James, my husband, the man I'd loved for 9 years, being led out of federal court in handcuffs. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his face gaunt. The charming British gentleman was gone, replaced by someone who looked small and defeated. The news anchor's voice narrated, James Holt, also known as James Arthur, has been formally charged with wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, money laundering, and corporate espionage. Federal prosecutors are calling it one of the most sophisticated long-term fraud schemes they've encountered. Holt faces up to 40 years in federal prison. The camera cut to another familiar face. Harriet Nicholas, standing beside Agent Brennan on the courthouse steps, speaking into a cluster of microphones. She wore a dark blazer, looking every inch the professional investigator she was. I want to thank the FBI and the brave individuals who came forward with evidence, Harriet was saying, her voice steady and professional. Mr. Holt has been operating this scheme for 15 years, destroying lives and families across 2 continents. Today's charges represent justice not just for his most recent victim, but for all of the people he's hurt over the years. This case demonstrates that patient, thorough investigation will eventually bring even the most sophisticated criminals to justice. A reporter shouted a question, "Is it true you went undercover for 2 years to catch him?" I did what was necessary to build a case that would hold up in court and protect future victims, Harriet replied carefully. Sometimes justice requires patience and personal sacrifice. Gracie muted the television. The plea negotiation is happening this afternoon. His attorney knows he has no defense. The question is how many years he serves, not if he serves them. With the evidence we have, I'd expect something in the 30-year range. What about Mario? I asked. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. He's already given 3 depositions and will testify at any related trials. Turns out he was recording everything on his phone from the beginning. He knew something was wrong and wanted protection if it all went sideways. She pulled up an email on her computer. He sent you this, by the way. Asked me to pass it along. I read the message from Mario. Gemma, I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I was desperate for work, for money, for a chance to use my acting skills for something that paid rent. I convinced myself it was harmless, that it was just a weird rich person thing, maybe research for a reality show or something. By the time I realized what I was actually part of, I was terrified. Thank you for giving me a way out instead of letting me go down with him. I'm back in London now, teaching drama at a community college in Hackney. Trying to use my skills for something honest. I hope someday you can find peace. You deserved so much better than what he did to you. Mario. I closed the email without responding. Maybe someday I'd forgive him for sleeping in my bed and eating at my table while my real husband stole my life. But not today. The divorce proceedings? I asked. Fast-tracked. Judge Morrison, no relation to me, is handling it personally. She's not sympathetic to men who commit federal crimes against their spouses. The marriage is being annulled on grounds of fraud. You'll keep the townhouse, your personal assets, and you're first in line for restitution from the recovered funds. How much? Preliminary estimates suggest you'll recover about 90% of what was stolen from you directly. The insider trading profits are being distributed among the defrauded companies and their shareholders, but you're entitled to substantial damages on top of your recovered assets. Between the restitution, the damage awards, and the townhouse equity, you'll actually come out ahead financially. Significantly ahead. Money. I'd cared about money once, before I learned that the man I'd built a life with was a professional liar who'd married me as part of a fraud scheme. What about the townhouse? I asked. Can I sell it? Gracie nodded. Once the criminal proceedings are complete and the property lien is released. Probably in 6 months. 6 months living in a home that now felt like a crime scene. 6 months of neighbors whispering and reporters occasionally showing up. 6 months of being that woman whose husband was an imposter. I can't stay there, I said quietly. You don't have to. Sublet it, stay with Douglas, get a hotel. You have options now, Gemma. More options than James ever gave you. 3 months later, I stood in the empty living room of the Boston townhouse, keys in hand, waiting for the real estate agent to arrive for the final walkthrough. The movers had taken the last boxes yesterday, most of it donated or sold. I couldn't bear to keep furniture that James had chosen, dishes we'd eaten from together, the bed where Mario had slept while pretending to be my husband. The walls bore pale rectangles where artwork had hung. The hardwood floors showed indentations from furniture that was gone. It looked like what it was, the skeleton of a life that had never really existed. My phone buzzed. A text from Abigail. Coffee at the new place when you're done? Want to see the office set up? I smiled. The office. My new venture. What had started as trauma had transformed into purpose. The real estate agent arrived, a brisk woman named Patricia who'd handled the sale with professional discretion. The buyers, a young couple expecting their first child, had offered asking price, attracted by the location and the renovated kitchen. They didn't seem to know or care about the property's recent infamy. The news cycle had moved on. All set? Patricia asked, reviewing the documents one final time. All set. I signed the papers, handed over the keys, and walked out of that house for the last time. No tears, no dramatic backward glances. Just one foot in front of the other, moving forward because there was nowhere else to go. My new apartment in Cambridge was smaller, cheaper, mine. No memories lived in those walls. No ghosts haunted the hallways. I'd furnished it from IKEA and secondhand stores, choosing things I actually liked rather than what looked impressive or fit some image of success. But it was the office that mattered most. Arthur Security Consulting occupied a modest suite in a building near MIT. The name had been Abigail's suggestion: take back your maiden name. Take back your identity. The brass nameplate on the door read, Gemma Arthur, Specialist in Digital Identity Verification and Marital Asset Protection. What started as word-of-mouth referrals from Gracie's legal contacts had grown into something bigger. Women who suspected their husbands weren't who they claimed to be. Men who'd found suspicious charges on joint accounts. People who felt crazy for questioning their own realities, who needed someone to tell them they weren't paranoid, they were perceptive. Abigail met me at a cafe down the street, 2 laptops open on the table between us. She'd come on as my technical partner, bringing her digital forensics expertise. Together, we developed systems for detecting deep fakes, tracing hidden assets, and documenting evidence that would hold up in court. 3 new inquiries this morning, she said, sliding her laptop toward me. A surgeon in Newton thinks her husband has been using deep fake technology to appear at medical conferences. A finance executive in Wellesley discovered his wife has a whole separate family in Connecticut. And this one, she pulled up an email, is from a woman in London. Her sister saw her husband in first class to Singapore with another woman. The sister is a flight attendant. I read the email, seeing my own story reflected back at me. The confusion, the disbelief, the desperate need for someone to believe that what seemed impossible was actually happening. Tell her I'll take the case, I said. Douglas appeared at our table, carrying a tray with 3 coffees. He'd taken a leave of absence from Weber Aviation after everything happened, claiming he needed time to process. What he'd really needed was to help me rebuild. My little brother, who'd made that phone call from Dubai, who'd refused to let me dismiss what he'd seen, who'd been there for every deposition and every court appearance. The Whitman case wrapped up this morning, he said, sitting down. Husband was definitely using AI to fake video calls from business trips while actually living with his girlfriend in Miami. Wife gets the house, the kids, and full custody. We documented everything perfectly. Another one saved, Abigail said, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. But it didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. Every case we took was another person's life unraveling, another carefully constructed lie exposed. We didn't create the problems, we just illuminated them. My phone rang. Harriet Nicholas. We'd stayed in touch after everything settled. She'd gotten her job back with Manchester Police. Actually, she'd gotten a promotion, appointed as lead investigator for a new international fraud task force focused on long-term identity theft schemes. Gemma, are you sitting down? Yes. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. James took the plea deal this morning. 32 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for 25. Full restitution ordered. It's over. Officially, legally, completely over. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. 32 years. James was 43. He'd be 75 when he got out, if he lived that long. His life of charming women and stealing their futures was finished. Thank you, I managed. For everything. For not giving up. For believing he could be caught. You did the hard part. You figured it out, you built the case, you refused to be gaslit into thinking you were crazy. You saved yourself, Gemma. I just helped document it. After we hung up, I sat there with Douglas and Abigail, letting the reality sink in. It was over. The legal proceedings, the uncertainty, the fear that somehow James would slip away again like he had for 15 years. So what now? Douglas asked. I looked at the stack of case files on the table, at the business I'd built from wreckage, at the sister and brother who'd become my partners in this strange new mission. Now we help the next person, I said. 6 months after the sentencing, I sat across from a potential client in my Cambridge office. Her name was Heather, and her hands shook as she showed me photos on her phone, her husband boarding a plane to Tokyo while he was supposedly homesick with the flu. I know this sounds insane, she said, her voice breaking. My therapist thinks I'm having paranoid delusions. My mother says I'm looking for problems that don't exist. But I know what I saw. I recognized the desperation in her eyes, the fear of losing your grip on reality, the isolation of suspecting something nobody else believes. It doesn't sound insane, I said gently. And you're not paranoid. You're observant. There's a difference. Relief flooded her face, the relief of being believed, of having someone validate that the world wasn't making sense because the world actually wasn't making sense. We spent the next hour reviewing her evidence. By the time she left, I'd identified 3 inconsistencies in her husband's travel patterns and 2 credit card charges that didn't match his reported location. We had a plan, a timeline, and most importantly, she had hoped that the truth, whatever it was, would eventually surface. After she left, I stood at my office window, looking out at the MIT campus where students hurried between classes, their futures still unwritten. I'd been one of them once, brilliant and naive, believing that intelligence and hard work were enough to protect you from deception. I knew better now. My phone buzzed with a text from Douglas, dinner tonight? My treat. Bringing Sarah. She wants to meet you properly. I smiled. My brother had started dating an aviation engineer he'd met at a conference, someone honest and straightforward who made him laugh. He deserved that. We all deserved that. Another text, this one from Abigail, the Henderson case just settled. Wife gets everything. Another win. We'd handled 47 cases in 6 months. 47 people who'd suspected their partners weren't who they claimed to be. We'd confirmed 32 of those suspicions, disproved 11 others, and 4 were still ongoing. Our success rate was built on thorough investigation, solid evidence, and the painful expertise I'd gained from my own experience. The irony wasn't lost on me that my husband's betrayal had become my career's foundation. I'd turned poison into medicine, trauma into purpose. Some days that felt empowering. Other days it felt like I was trapped in an endless loop of other people's worst moments. But mostly, it felt necessary. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Gracie entered, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a grin. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "The occasion is that the final restitution payment cleared this morning. Between the recovered funds, the damage settlement, and the townhouse sale, you're officially whole, financially, at least." She set the wine on my desk. $4.2 million, Gemma. You're independently wealthy. I stared at her. The number was abstract, meaningless. Money had stopped mattering the moment I learned that my entire marriage was a performance. What am I supposed to do with it? I asked. Whatever you want. Invest it. Travel. Expand the business. Buy a house on the Cape. Fund scholarships. Live your life the way you choose, not the way someone else scripted it. Live my life. As if I knew what that meant anymore. For 9 years, my life had been tangled with James's lies. For the 6 months since, it had been consumed by untangling them and helping others untangle theirs. Who was I when I wasn't investigating, documenting, exposing deception? I don't know who I am anymore, I admitted quietly. Gracie sat down across from me, her expression softening from celebration to understanding. That's okay. You're 38 years old. You have time to figure it out. And not knowing, that's liberating in its own way. You're not defined by what he did to you. You're defined by what you did in response. Maybe she was right. For 9 years, I'd thought I knew exactly who I was, Gemma Arthur, data security analyst, wife of James Arthur, future mother to children we'd planned to have someday. That identity had been stripped away, revealed as fiction. Now I was just Gemma. Single. Successful in a field I'd invented out of necessity. Helping others while still figuring out how to help myself. My calendar notification chimed. Tomorrow at 10, I had a consultation with a man whose wife had 3 different social media profiles under 3 different names. At 2, a follow-up with a woman whose husband's business partner didn't seem to exist. At 4, a deposition for an ongoing case involving cryptocurrency fraud and identity theft. Other people's crises. Other people's shattered realities. But each case I solved, each truth I uncovered, felt like justice not just for them but for everyone James had heard across 15 years and multiple identities. You know what? I said, opening the wine Gracie had brought. I think I'm going to take a vacation. A real one. Somewhere far away where nobody knows my story. Where are you thinking? I pulled up a travel website on my laptop, scrolling through destinations. Portugal, New Zealand, Japan, Argentina. Places I'd never been, experiences I'd never had. Then I stopped scrolling, a small laugh escaping. Definitely not Argentina, I said. James bought a villa there. I never want to see that country. Fair enough. What about Scotland? You said you went there with him, but maybe you could reclaim it. Make new memories. I thought about it. The Highlands, the castles, the rugged beauty I'd seen through the filter of a lie. Maybe it was time to see it through my own eyes. Maybe, I said. Or maybe somewhere completely new. Somewhere I've never been with anyone. Somewhere that's just mine. That sounds perfect. Douglas arrived for dinner as promised, bringing his girlfriend Sarah, a warm, genuine woman who looked at my brother like he was someone worth treasuring. We went to a small Italian restaurant in the North End, the kind with checkered tablecloths and waiters who'd worked there for decades. Over pasta and wine, Sarah asked me about the business, about how I'd started it, about what it was like to help people navigate the worst moments of their lives. It must be exhausting, she said thoughtfully. Emotionally, I mean. It is, I admitted. But it's also the only thing that's made any of this feel worthwhile. If I can prevent even one person from going through what I went through, or help them get out sooner, then maybe it wasn't all for nothing. It was never for nothing, Douglas said firmly. What he did to you was terrible, but what you've done with it, that's extraordinary. I looked at my brother, at the woman who made him happy, at Gracie raising her glass across the table. I thought about Abigail, probably still at the office working on case files. About Harriet in Manchester, fighting corruption and catching criminals. About Mario in London, teaching kids that some roles aren't worth playing. I've been thinking, I said slowly. About expanding the business. Maybe opening a second location. Maybe training other investigators, especially people who've been through something similar. Turn it into something bigger than just me. That's brilliant, Gracie said. A franchise model for protecting people from identity theft and marital fraud. Not a franchise, I corrected. A network. A support system. Because the hardest part wasn't the investigation or the legal battles. It was feeling crazy and alone and like nobody would believe me. Douglas reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're not alone. And you never were. Even when it felt like it. After dinner, walking back to my car through the narrow streets of the North End, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but something close to it. Peace, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Another inquiry, this one from a woman in California whose husband had been acting strangely after returning from a business trip. I'd read it tomorrow. Tonight, I was going to go home to my small apartment with its IKEA furniture and its absence of ghosts. I was going to pour a glass of wine, put on music I actually liked, and think about where I wanted to go on vacation. Maybe Scotland. Maybe Japan. Maybe somewhere I'd never even considered. The future was uncertain, unwritten, entirely my own. And for the first time in 10 years, that felt exactly right. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.